Listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a good day. So today we are going to go through the basics of getting started with Dynamics CRM JavaScript development. So we're just going to kind of touch at a high level some of the things we need to get started and a few commands. Then I'll have some stuff I'm going to send you later today that will help you test for yourself. So let's get going. My name is Mitch Milam. I'm a Dynamics CRM architect. You can reach me at any of the following methods: email, my blog, my main blog there, and of course Twitter. So if you have any questions, follow up, just send me an email after you get done. This is also being recorded, so I'll put this on my YouTube channel as well if you want to catch up with some things you might have missed after we get done. Also, this is part of my Teaching Tuesdays webinar series. Today is Tuesday. And if you go out to tinyurl.com, Teaching Tuesdays will take you to a Google moderator site. And there you can suggest new topics that you want to hear about. You can vote up or vote down, actually, topics that already exist. This will be available till the end of June when Google is going to stop the service. So if you got anything to say, then do it now, and I really appreciate it. And then we'll guide the next series of things based on what we have there. I'm thinking the next one, which is going to be in two weeks, is going to be on JavaScript debugging. I think what I'm going to do, but I'm still trying to decide on that for sure. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about setting up your toolbox. We're going to talk about using JavaScript web resources, using attributes and controls, and then tabs and sections. And again, this is only a small part of what we have available to us, but since this is just an introduction, I just kind of wanted to get you a little flavor of how it actually works. Okay, to get started with, I would firmly suggest that you get a copy of Visual Studio. So there's a tiny URL here for VS 2013 Community Edition, and this will actually save you a tremendous amount of time and trouble by allowing you to access a real development environment to do your JavaScript code in. You can use either 2013 or 2015. There's probably not much a difference in the two for JavaScript developers, but having a real tool that will give you some intelligence on the JavaScript code, stuff that will help you find errors when you make silly mistakes like we all do at times, that really and truly will help you get your job done faster and easier. Editing in the little white box that shows up when you're editing a web resource can be done. I mean, we do it all the time, but I cannot tell you how much of my life I've actually lost by having an L that's supposed to be an I, having a apostrophe that's bad, or things like that. So having a real code editor is a great thing to have. Also, you need to download the Dynamics CRM SDK. There is a ton of samples of information in the help file of anything you could imagine in there. So there's just a tremendous amount of work that goes into maintaining and keeping that up to date. So always download the CRM SDK, and they have versions for pretty much any of the revisions of CRM from CRM 4 on up. What I do is I like to keep at least a couple versions back because sometimes they make changes that are not good, and sometimes we have to roll back. And then I have a version of the SDK for, say, 2011, 2013, and 2015, which would be version 5, version 6, and version 7. And I just keep those around because sometimes you actually end up having to go back a version depending on what you're working with, and having a specific version of the SDK is very helpful to know what you can and cannot do. So setting up your development environment, this is going to be 100% dependent on what your situation is. So if you were in on-premise mode, having a development server is just a whole lot of fun because you basically can do things without interfering with anybody else. If you are not in a situation where you have a development environment, say you're on CRM Online, depending on your user count, you may actually have a sandbox instance available to you. That's a lot of goodness there too, because you can make changes and experiment without it impacting users. Again, if you go back to the on-premise thing, you can create a virtual machine on your Windows 8, 8.1, or maybe one of your Windows Server environments that has a CRM copy, so that you can just take your production database and then put it onto your virtual machine and then work with the data there that's semi-useful and up to date. Again, this is 100% dependent on your situation. I worked in all these environments where I have a real development environment. I worked in environments where we don't have a development environment, so everything has to be done in production. And so the ability for you to make changes without worrying about impacting users is a tremendous asset to you, but sometimes you just don't have that choice. So let's talk about web resources related to JavaScript. So with 2011 and above, JavaScript is stored as a web resource, which is just a type of web resource. Within that is just a plain text file. You separate your JavaScript into functions. You associate those functions with form and field events. And then you can also use the ribbon. You can connect to controls on, to functions inside of your JavaScript libraries as well. So I'm not sure anybody's working with ribbon much, but that's a possibility as well. So the idea here is that we create one web resource per entity. So like account, we'll get that in a second. One web resource per entity ribbon. And by the way, if I keep talking web resource, I will turn into Elmer Fudd. Just to kind of give you a warning right now, so I apologize about that up front. So the idea between having a resource for an entity and a resource for an entity ribbon is because a lot of times if you have a very substantial code base associated with something, say in the account, it's very easy for you to lose the functions that are associated with the ribbon buttons. And I like to separate those out so that I know specifically all of my ribbon code is in one web resource, all of my entity code is in another web resource. And it just makes for a little bit better things, because I can't tell you how many times you see this function like it's not being used anywhere and you delete it, not knowing that somebody else had actually attached that function to a ribbon button, and now that ribbon button doesn't work anymore. So that's kind of common if you're not very communicative in your team. Then what I do is I create a generic or utility web resources for specific things, like maybe working with strings, or maybe I just have generic stuff that I work with. And then finally we have tool-specific resources, such like jQuery or JSON2. So those are just tools that we can use, and so they go into their own web resource, and then that can be attached to the form and utilized from there. So the idea, again, is you keep everything separate so that it's easier to maintain. That's the whole key here. So here's kind of a layout visually of how it works. So I've got my account main web resource, and inside that I have a function for on load, for on save, and then on the name on change. Then I have a utility resource where I have functions like is email valid, get the role name from the ID, and then show alert, and then a specific resource for strings. So I have like phone number format. I have a building of full name and then building of address. So these are just kind of examples of what you would find in this type of thing. So naming conventions. So the general rule, and this is kind of what Microsoft has done with their work, is the name of the entity _main_library.js. Same for the ribbon. I always recommend that you add the extension to the web resource. Strictly because some of the tools that you have available to you will export those web resources out from CRM and put them onto the file system. If they don't have an extension, they're not recognized either by the operating system or the tool as a specific type of thing. So for JavaScript, it's .js. For HTML, it's either HTML or .htm. Then the images, you got .png, .jpg for JPEG and PNG specifically. So here's some examples of stuff at the bottom, which I actually misspelled one, and he fixed that. So the event handlers are what actually ties our JavaScript functions to something that's going to happen on the form. So the major events that we have are onload, onsave, and onChange. So the onload would happen when the form is first opened. The onsave would happen when something causes the page to save, such as you pushing the save button, or maybe some of the automated things like on the quote where you make a change or press the recalculate button, it will actually change things. And then they're associated with the handler properties on the right-hand side in that figure. You select the library, you type in the name of the function that's actually going to be called, and then specify a few of the other things. And whenever that event happens, it's going to execute that piece of JavaScript in that function found in that JavaScript library. So that's how that works. So that ties your JavaScript web libraries to your thing on the form, either the form itself or to a field on the form. So that ties that all together. So here is the JavaScript object model from a very, very high level. So the JavaScript object model is the one that provides us the functionality for accessing the elements on the page. So the main thing we work with is something called xrm.page. So we have a context which tells us environmental information about either CRM itself or the page or the record we're on. We have a data thing that we can get to that shows us the entity or the processes. We have the UI elements, which are the actual form elements themselves. It could be controls, navigation elements, the form selector, tabs, sections, processes, things like that. And then finally, we have a utility class that does things like show us forms and show alerts and things like that. So these are the general objects that make up the object model. The ones in the bluish gray are actually collections of things. So we have a collection of attributes and a collection of controls. We have a collection of items for navigation and items for form selector. Tabs have sections, sections have controls. So that's the hierarchy that we work with. And we'll be talking about those here in just a second. So there are, I don't know how many actual methods that are part of the CRM object model now. It's probably somewhere between 80 and 110, something like that. So as they continue to evolve CRM, they continue to add methods available to us in the SDK for the xrm.page model. So that's why the SDK is so helpful, because it has all these things documented. So if we look at what we can work with on a form, there are actually two pieces of information that make up an actual field on the form. The first thing is data. So it's the actual attribute that contains, say, the account name or the contact first name. That is an attribute. The control is the physical data entry piece of the form. So it's either going to be a text box or a lookup or a drop down or whatever it might be. So that's the actual data control itself. There's only one attribute ever on the form, but you can have multiple controls pointing back to that same attribute. Back in the old days, if we wanted a field to be duplicated on a specific tab, remember back in the 4.0 days, we had separate tabs, and what happened was we would want a field on one form. So we either did some really strange JavaScript manipulation of the document object model, or the DOM, or we actually created two different fields, and we put one on one tab and one on another tab, and then we have JavaScript that kept them in sync. So since that is really a bad idea to have two fields with exactly the same data, Microsoft finally gave us the ability to put a control on a form more than once. It's only the same piece of data, it just looks different. So if you make a change in one of those fields, it will make a change to the other field and keep it updated and in sync. So both the attributes and controls have specific xrm.page methods to do the work. So most of the time they're fairly kind of common sense of this thing like get value from an attribute or set visibility to a control. But every now and then you'll get into things, especially like when you're working with option sets, where you actually kind of have to go and look at the SDK about where it is, because some of the decisions were made. They decided that, okay, for an option set, this is going to be an attribute thing, and then this is going to be a control thing. So you're just going to have to look at it and see which one you have to work with. If you try to execute a method that is associated with an attribute, but you're using a control, it will give you an error, and the same, the reverse is true. So we have a couple shortcut methods that get us access to either the attribute or control, and it's just simply xrm.page.getAttribute or xrm.page.getControl. In parentheses there, we put the name of the attribute, and then follow that with another method that actually gets us where we're trying to go. So we'll get into that in just a second. So let's talk about working with data. So there are many different methods that are available to us. The things we're going to talk about today are the getting of a value from an attribute and the setting of a value of an attribute. So those are done with the get value and set value methods. The get value physically pulls the value of the attribute out of the field and then puts it wherever you, or just whatever you want to with it. So in this case, we're getting an attribute called m3 underscore first name. We're going to get the value and then put it into a variable called first name. The data that is returned by get value is going to be 100% dependent on the type of field it is. So as you can see from the list, we have a CRM data type and then a JavaScript return type. Most of the time, they're exactly the same. So a Boolean as a data type is going to be a JavaScript Boolean. The date time is going to be a date. Decimal, integer, double, things like that are all going to be numbers, money, option set. Lookup is going to be array because a lookup has several pieces, including the ID, the type, and the display value. String fields or text fields and memo fields are both going to be a string type within JavaScript. So the reason this is important is because depending on the data type, there are certain JavaScript things that you can and cannot do. So you have to kind of understand those. So this is a good table for you to keep advised of. So a set value is going to set the value of the attribute. So in this case, what we're going to do is we have a sample entity that has a first name, last name, and then name field or full name field. It should have been named. So what we're going to do, we're going to pull the first name and the last name values out of their respective fields. We're going to concatenate those with a space in between to end up with a full name, and then we're going to use the set value method to take the full name and stick it into the m3 underscore name attribute. One thing about the attribute names, they're always in lowercase. So if you try to give it a mixed case, like say capital L, capital N for last name, then it would fail. Okay, so all the attributes are always lowercase. So here's a couple methods that we have when working with controls. So the common ones are we would like to set it to be visible or not, or disabled or not. Again, you get a handle to control with a get to control, and then in the case of the set visible, we turn it on or we turn it off. So if we do something to where we would like to enable a field or visible on the form, we would set it to true, or we would set it to false if we want to turn it off. Now, in this particular case, we have, in addition to the JavaScript that we can do, there's a checkbox on the property values of the field called visible by default. So anytime that you have a field that could be turned on or off depending on the situation, I always have a general rule that I would like to hide it to start with, because it is faster for the form rendering engine to do the work than it is for you to execute a piece of JavaScript to tell it what to do. So if it's going to be hidden or shown, I generally turn it off to start with, and then I turn it back on again when I need to. Okay. The same works for the disabled. There is a field called read-only, or checkbox called read-only on the properties of the field, and I can set that on the configuration, or I can set it in code, and again, the configuration is always going to be faster than the code is. The faster depends on exactly how fast the user's workstation is, as well as how fast the CRM system is itself. There are times when, depending on the amount of things you have on the form, the network, all the things considered, you can actually see the user interface change in front of you. So for instance, if you're hiding a bunch of fields, you can actually see the form display, the fields will be shown, and all of a sudden the fields will disappear. And that's not a very good user experience. Okay. So in the case of disabled, what we do is we have the ability to set it to disabled, which is read-only, by setting it to true. So set disabled true makes the field read-only. Set disabled to false makes it read-write again. So the next thing let's talk about are going to be the tabs and the sections. So one of the things we're going to talk about with tabs is set focus. Now I think I screwed my slide up, so I apologize, because right now I'm going to tell you about how to show the tabs. So let's talk about that instead. So tabs can be visible or collapsed. So we're going to talk about the visibility at this point in time. So while we're talking about the actual visibility of a tab, we need to talk about how this actually shows to the user. So there's kind of two schools of thought. sometimes it can be disruptive for a user to see things magically appear on the screen. So one of the things you can do is you can actually collapse the tab. And so it's collapsed until you need it. And then when you set to focus, which is the thing on the other slide, it would actually expand it. But sometimes you don't want to show things if a particular case is true. So for instance, if you're on a contact and you're using the relationship type field, you want to show, if it's a, say, employee, you want to show the personal information tab. But if it's a vendor, there is no personal information, there's only company information, so you want to see the company information tab. In that case, using either JavaScript or the configuration that you can do, just like with the fields to set the visibility by default, you can show or hide the tab. So again, you use configuration first because it's faster. So what you would do is you would hide the tab to start with, and then using JavaScript, depending on the situation on the form, you can actually show these things, show the tab using the set visible true. Okay, and the way you get to the tab, there is no shortcut for a tab or for a section. You have to use the full name, which is xrm.page.ui.tabs.get. And the get in general terms gets a handle to a specific tab, either by number reference, which is from 0 to the number of tabs, or by name. Always use a name, so that if you rearrange your tabs, you're not caught off guard. So sections work exactly like tabs. So the only difference is with working with a section is the sections are dependent on the tab. So you get a handle to the tab using xrm.page.ui.tabs.get and then the name of the tab, then .sections.get and the name of the section, and then you can do things like set the visibility to false, which would hide it, or true, which would show it. So I promise this will get easier the more you work with it. So kind of in summary, what we talked about was setting up your toolbox, working with web resources, working with attributes and controls, and working with tabs and sections. So the next thing that I need you to do, and this is all homework, is I need you to go and set your toolbox up. I'm going to email you later today with a document that kind of was one thing, an email with the links that I mentioned. And then I'm also going to include a link to a document that will allow you to practice some of the things that we talked about today, because I can talk all day long, but until you actually sit down and actually do it yourself, you're probably not going to learn a whole lot. So the document takes you through creating of a new entity that it's just a sample entity that has fields on it that then you can go through and work through some of the exercises that we talked about here today, like showing and hiding fields and tabs and sections and things like that. So, and a few more things, but it's just a general kind of practice document that I like to get my students working on. So I will send it out later today to everybody who attended and even those who didn't. We do have some upcoming training. So I have a full week of an extending CRM Dynamics CRM course the week of June 1st. And this starts off with doing customization and configuration and ends up doing plugins and custom workflow activities and everything in between. So we're going to have JavaScript in that. We're going to have .NET stuff in that. So if you have people who are .NET programmers who want to learn how to become CRM developers, then this is the course for you. In addition to that, in combination with the CRM users group, we have a JavaScript development, which is only JavaScript, on the 18th and the 19th. So if that's of interest to you, then go out to the CRM UG Academy and you can register for that as well. So who do I have questions from? Just raise your hand or put them in the chat box, question box. No questions at all? Oh, there we go. Yes, Jessica, she asked, are all those JavaScript tips for 2015 as well? Yes. In all honesty, when they came out with the XRM.page model, which was for CRM 2011, it really hasn't changed. All they've done is really adding stuff to it. So The code that we wrote, if you wrote it correctly for 2011, it should work in 2013 and 2015 in 99% of all cases. Yeah, Rob, on the extending class, we do get into a lot of .NET stuff. So if you're not a C# dev, it might be kind of lost on you. We can talk about that later. We can talk about that tomorrow at the CRM meeting if you want to. But it's really for .NET developers because we cover a lot of stuff. We cover, like I said, the creating plugins and custom workflow activities. So it's a possibility, but you don't want to get in over your head. Put it that way. Let's see, Robert. Yes, there is. Robert had a really great question here. It's just disappeared on me. Is there a tool for JavaScript development with IntelliSense? Yes, there is. Go out to crmsolutionmanager.com, and I'll put this in the note I'll send you out later today. And it's a third-party tool. It is a commercial tool, so you have to buy it. But it allows you. It's a Visual Studio plugin that will connect to CRM and pull out your web resources. Part of what it does is it will build up an XRM page model that matches your organization, so that when you type in xrm.page say get attribute whatever, every time you put a dot, it will pop up IntelliSense and show you the next available option to that. So that is for both the XRM page model and then as well the fields and the attributes and controls that you have available to you. It's very handy. Like I said, it's less than a couple $100. It's very easy to justify. And again, what it will do is allow you to pull the web resources directly out of CRM, and then when you're done, it will push them back in. I've used it personally for JavaScript development. It also does stuff with plugins. I didn't use that feature, but that's available. So it's 100% it's really well done. They also have a free sitemap editor that I recommend. So those are all good. That's a good question. Thanks, Robert. See, Michael. Michael's question is it worth to build your own editable grid instead of buying one like from AbleBridge? Well, that is a trick question. The way I always put it is, are you in the business of selling tools? If you're not in the business of developing selling tools, then why would you spend the time and money to create an editable grid? That's the first question. That's also a trick question because it really depends on your situation. I have seen development efforts. I can guarantee you without a doubt it will take you much more time and money to develop your own than it will to buy one, by probably several times. Like I said, I have seen it done. If you have a very specific thing you're after, and the commercial products out there, and AbleBridge is not the only one. I've never used AbleBridge, but I've heard very good things about it. But the biggest thing is, I would choose the difference between the two of developing your own versus a commercial product is what's the support like? What's the product life like? Like, are they continuing to update it? Are they in the community, or are they providing value back to the community? With like helping people out, do stuff, answering questions on the forum, things like that. The biggest thing is, does it do what you want? If it doesn't do what you want, does it almost do what you want? And if it's almost does what you want, and you ask them what would it take to add this feature, that would be a good indication. Or do they provide some kind of extensibility model where you could take what they did and add to it to give the functionality that you need? Because again, developing an editable grid, you could spend weeks working on it, and I'm not exaggerating that at all. Now, the tools to make editable grids now are much greater than they used to be, even say 2 years ago. There's a lot of things like Telerik has a thing called Kendo UI. You can use that to create a grid with. That's really pretty simple. It depends on your level of knowledge and your comfort with the tools. So really and truly, it all boils down to the fact of, is it worth the time and money to invest your own time into it, which is money, or is it cheaper to get somebody else's if it does the job? And that's, you just kind of have to put them on the table, compare apples and apples, and see which one's best for you. That's a great question, though. Thanks. So Jeff asks, when creating a web resource, HTML JavaScript is a Visual Studio template to get you started with development. Jeff, are you referring to like how to lay out the projects and stuff? Um, not really. That CRM Solution Manager tool that I mentioned, it will automatically create a folder system that pulls it out for you. Um, I've never actually thought about doing it manually, I guess. But what you would do is you would create folders for each of your type of web resources. So I would stick all the JavaScript in one, all the images in another, HTML in another, things like that. That's how I would do it. Okay. Hassan says, how can we reduce the time between form load and triggering of the onload event? Um, that's going to really depend on about 50 different things that range everywhere from the speed of your CRM system to the complexity of your form to the amount of JavaScript you have. Um, quite honestly, there's not a lot you can do about a lot of that because that's strictly their issue. Um, with the spring release of 2015, we do have the ability to use the new form rendering engine. That is faster than the old engine, but for on-premise, it does no good at all because it's not out yet. So if you're online, you can try using that. If you're on-premise, I would say you're just going to have to wait. Okay. So Joel, are the two trainings I mentioned, which will address the web services and plugins, that would be the extending class. So the JavaScript class only does JavaScript, nothing else. So Rob, to clarify, yes, when you're writing JavaScript, it's just going to be JavaScript. You can use any editing tool you really want. The only question I have, and I didn't have time to verify it, is with the community edition that I pointed you to. I do not know if you can have a Visual Studio plugin. You may have to research that, and I'll try to research as well and get back to you. Usually, you have to have the full version, but I thought I heard the other day that the community version would allow you to install plugins. They have uh, Visual Studio Express editions. Those do not allow you to add plugins. So that means that things like ReSharper, which is a developer productivity tool, and the CRM Solution Manager would not be able to physically install themselves into Visual Studio. So basically, you couldn't connect. Sam, when you talk about, so your thing was you want to override the default CSS for with custom CSS. You're getting into basically unsupported terms there, and I don't recommend that too much because it's just going to cause you a nightmare later. I know you're trying to solve a problem, but in my experience, that solving that problem creates nightmares down the road, and you get into a position where you cannot upgrade your code, and that just makes work. And then what happens is you leave, and somebody else takes over, and then they have no idea what to do, and then the customers are used to using something, and then now you have to tell them, well, we can't do it anymore because this is unsupported. So it's kind of your judgment of about whether you need that or not, but that's I would not do that myself. Uh, Jeff, as far as covering JavaScript web resource, accessing web resources with JavaScript, we don't actually cover that in that class. We do cover the XRM Service Toolkit, which is a wrapper over the CRM data stuff. So it shows you how to use a toolkit to pull data back from CRM itself. But for just standard plain web resources, no, we don't cover that. Sorry, web services, we don't cover that. Sachin, the best way to use jQuery or OData, again, what I would use is something called the External Service Toolkit, and I'll include a link to that too. That wraps up all of the complexity of querying CRM data, and you don't need to know OData. You only need to know OData a little bit, but you don't need to know jQuery at all, and your OData is kind of minimal, and that way you don't have a whole new tool set to learn. Nathan, where's the best way to find out where a JavaScript function is being used? Um, that is really difficult, quite honestly. I have a tool called Snapshot that I wrote that actually has a feature that does that. That's a commercial product. That would do it if you want. Other than that, you actually literally have to pull it out of CRM. So like what I had to do is I had to extract all of the it's kind of a really complicated thing. You have to pull out all of the system forms, XML. You have to parse that out to find the event handlers. You have to create a list of the function names, and then you can match up the web library and the function name to find out where it came from. Again, not rocket science, but it's just a little bit, you have to know where all the pieces are. There's nothing that's built in that shows you, oh, I'm using this thing on this page. You can find what forms you are using your JavaScript web library on by going to the Solution Explorer and then clicking on one of the web resources and then selecting Show Dependencies. That will show you the form that you're being used on, but it won't tell you where on the form it's being used. That might get you really close to where you're going without having to buy my tool. Kim, no, I'm not. I'm going to have a recording of this, so I'm not going to send the slide deck out. I'm just going to have the recording. So Todd says, wouldn't the CRM service utility be helpful for IntelliSense type support? Actually, not really. Strictly because the way it's written, it's actually when you're talking about JavaScript IntelliSense within Visual Studio, what you're doing is actually adding a JavaScript file, believe it or not, that has a specially formatted file format that says, when I am doing this IntelliSense stuff, I want you to interpret the file in this manner. So it's just a .js file that has this this kind of I think it's maybe a JSON type of protocol that just instructs Visual Studio. Here's where you can find information about this and use that. The CRM service util is only going to generate code for your .NET stuff. I've never seen anybody actually use it like that. Okay, Rob has a really good answer that I can't read right now, so let me make that bigger. Oops. Okay, so he says there are two main differences between the Visual Studio Community and Express. Express do not allow extensions, which I call plugins. There are 5,000 great plugins in Visual Studio Gallery, plugins such as Developer Assistant, etc., blah, blah, blah. They're not available in Express. So yes, you can access plugins with the Visual Studio Community Edition. Okay, very good, Rob. Thank you for figuring that out. So yes, actually, like I said, I had just heard that on a podcast not more than 2 weeks ago. So that's usually I point people at the Express versions, but they have that one feature. Then I heard about the Community Edition, which I'd never even heard of before, and it's been out forever. So yeah, so that's why I pointed you to the Community Edition. Very go, very good. Thank you, sir. So Hassan, is there any way to execute a fetch XML query inside of JavaScript? Yes, that's one of the things that external service toolkit I was telling you about. That's what it does. It can actually perform a query either using OData or using fetch, and then you get the results set back, and then you're the developer, so you can decide what to do with it. So if you want to do a pop-up, you can do that just fine. So my class question, if you want to get the data, is there an advantage of using jQuery JSON instead of just external service request? Since the external service request, you don't have to be using the JSON library. Again, what I would use is the external service toolkit, which wraps everything in a very clear layer that keeps you from having to write anything low level like that. So that's again my recommendation. And like I said, I'll include the link in the email to you. So what the what the External Service Toolkit does is it wraps everything so you don't have to worry about preparing the request, sending a request, getting a request back, parsing a request, and giving it back to the user. You just literally say, retrieve this thing, or create this record, or delete this record, and that's all there is to it. Let's see. Victor asks, in your opinion, what level of job security can I have as a freelancer if the word MSCRM, if specializing in customization, configuration, JavaScript development with no knowledge of plugin development? That's a pretty good question. I think that really kind of depends. In all honesty, if you're doing CRM development work, you're going to be doing development work in Visual Studio for plugin development and for JavaScript. Very rarely do I have a situation where I'm only doing one or the other. Most of the time it's both, but it depends on the customer. So a lot of customizations now you can do without writing a line of code, either JavaScript or a plugin. But when you need to branch into where you have to have custom code, the main thing you have to realize is which one is more appropriate, a JavaScript solution or a plugin solution, and you really have to understand that. And really the only way you're going to understand that is to know both technologies. Brad, yes, this is recorded. It'll be up on my YouTube channel later today as soon as it gets through rendering stuff. So probably by the end of the day, I'll get everything out to you. Hassan asks, can we trigger plugins inside a JS function? The answer is no. Plugins are done at the business level. The business, I'm having a blank right now. Business logic layer. So the only way you can trigger a plugin is if you do something like save the record or create a new record. That's the only way a plugin is going to get created or triggered. Okay, these are all great questions. Excellent questions. Okay, anything else I might have missed? Nope. Well, I really appreciate the time for everybody today. And like I said, go out to the tinyurl.com/teaching Tuesdays. And if you got any other ideas you'd like to see, then just put your idea in or vote up an existing topic. This is a lot of fun for me because I get to talk about all the stuff that I do for a living, and it's a lot of fun. So hey, if anything pops up, or drop me an email, or send me a tweet, whatever might be. So anything that you want to do to learn more about what we're doing as CRM developers, then please let me know. Okay. And if that is it, I again will really appreciate you coming by, and we'll be seeing you next time. Thanks.